it's hard to read, but it says, schools should be places in which raw products, children, are to be shaped and formed into finished products, manufactured like nails. And the specifications for manufacturing will come from government and industry. Mr. Coverley went on to become the dean of the Stanford School of Education. Stanford just recently became the top college in the United States. And so this was the way that a lot of our systems developed around learning and education. And so what we did was we decided that to be able to get as many people as possible ready for their next step in life, which was often work, we had to have these production processes, which unfortunately still many of them are with us today. And if you think about this, it kind of there were two different functions going on. One was that we needed to mass produce. We needed to get a bunch of kids, typically of an age cohort, into a room. And then we had to apply a process by which we could evaluate them. We call it testing. In the United States, we have something called the Common Core. And kids don't get to go on to the next step unless they pass a series of tests. And so the result was you take this mass production process, you take a set of tests, and what you get is the Harry Potter-like sorting function. You get kids that essentially start to get sorted into the places that they will eventually benefit government and industry. And so I know this is a rather negative view of our education systems, but the truth is this is the way they were originally designed. And as you know from design thinking, it's those original principles that then are fractal. That is, they path out through the way that systems work. And so this is our challenge, is that we designed our systems to try to calibrate around these processes. And as a matter of fact, what we did then in that shift from agricultural to industrial economies is we didn't even all agree that we were doing this. And as a matter of fact, when you were born, nobody told you this was the arc of your life. But we sort of separated the phases of our lives into three boxes. It just so happens my father, Dick Bolles, who passed away a year and a half ago, was an author, and he wrote a book called The Three Boxes of Life in 1976. And he basically said, this is the arc of our lives. Nobody told you this when you were born. Your parents didn't walk you through this. But the basic premise was you're going to have a big chunk of education at the beginning of your life. Then you're going to shift into this new box of work. You're going to work in probably one or two fields, but pretty much for a linear period of time. And then you're going to have a big chunk of leisure in what I call the period formerly known as retirement. And so those three boxes were the arcs of our lives, because as we shifted from that agriculture to industrial economy, we needed to actually structure things like corporations and factories, and we needed to have jobs and hierarchies, because that's how we were able to manage all the information that we needed to gather and all the ways that we were able to do our work. And so this three boxes model continues today, but it's starting to erode. Now, at the end of this education box comes college. And it isn't, of course, that everybody got sorted into going to college. There's a lot of education systems around the world that actually separate into much more trade sort of focus and then much more sort of higher education focus. But the basic premise of a college is that there are a set of skills that you needed to acquire. There's research going back to the 1950s. Actually, this was done in America when we returned from the World War II. We needed to sort of figure out how we're going to build this economy, and it just turned out it was sort of a consumer economy, and we needed to figure out how their skills could be applied to different kinds of work. And there's research going back to the 50s. There's a man by the name of Sidney Fine who realized that actually skills, the capabilities that we have as human beings, can be separated into two different categories. So one category is basically bodies of information. We call these special knowledges, or just plain knowledges. And so that's typically a body of information that's sort of anchored or rooted in a particular arena. My knowledge of brain surgery is probably not going to help me to repair a car, or I hope vice versa. But the basic premise is if it's sort of rooted or anchored in one arena and it's not transferable to another, then that's a body of knowledge. And we've got unlimited numbers of arenas, of fields, of industries, of jobs that have specific bodies of information that are rooted or anchored in each of those different arenas. But the other kind of skill are transferable skills. Now, these are skills that are not rooted or anchored in any particular arena, The skills that are used in a range of different situations. If you were good at persuading your parents to let you stay up late when you were young, you're probably going to be good at persuading throughout the rest of your life. But that college, that end of the learning box, was calibrated around these bodies of information. That's really what we designed colleges for. Now, we tend to call those knowledges hard skills, and we tend to call the transferable soft skills, but the problem with those is that those are actually fuzzy labels themselves. It doesn't really help us to understand why they're sort of anchored in one place and why these are transferable. So I'll come back to this model a little bit later, but the basic premise is that we designed a lot of our education systems around that, around getting a body of knowledge into your head. Now, why did we do that? It's because when you came to college, that's where they kept the information. It's in the heads of the teachers, it's in the books on the shelves. Where do we carry the world's information now? In our digital distraction machines. We've got access to the world's information here. So this, of course, is the way we design things in the past, but it's always important to look back in the past and the filters of the present to project in the future. So I talked about what we did to design the learning experience in schools. What about them as sort of, I don't want to call them businesses, but what about them as organizations? Well, actually, it turns out that college, so I'm a recovering journalist. I used to run the technology magazines. As the editorial director of 6 different publications in the 1990s, and now it's a run business. You wouldn't do a magazine again. Hard to make money. But it's actually kind of similar to the way a school works. So there's a physical plant. A college has a physical plant. That's the grounds that we're on. You can create curriculum. You can deliver it. You have a brand new network. You recruit students. You manage alumni. You connect to alumni. And then in many cases, in most countries, there's an accreditation process. It's that sort of a bundle of different functions. Well, a magazine's kind of similar. We have a physical plant, we create content, we curate content, we smear ink on dead trees, we mail it around. All of those are functions that were sort of bundled together. And so that's really, when you think about higher education, you think about college. That's kind of what it is. And so we had this transition from an agricultural and industrial economy, sort of cemented that business model. That's kind of the way education has worked for a long time. Well, I argue what we're shifting from now is just as fundamental as that shift from agricultural to industrial economies and societies. And I call it a digital work economy. And the reason I call it that is because more and more technology is infusing the way we think, the way we learn, the way we perform our activities, the way we solve problems. It's not that technology should take over, but it's increasingly enabling what we do. And so that's actually an inflection point. I think we're going to look back in 10 years, 15 years, and we're going to say, this is when it started. This is when it all started to unbundle. So it turns out that actually, that shift from an agricultural industrial society and then now to our digital work economy, so much of our advances technologically, the things that we've done as human beings to try to sort of push the ball forward and learn how to use technology in new ways, are pretty recent. As a matter of fact, it's sort of this exponential curve. What does that mean? So I know it's ironic me talking about the future of education and learning when I barely escaped high school. And I was never very good at math. But what memory is that if I take 30 steps 1 meter at a time, I'm guessing without a calculator that I'll have gone 30 meters. But if instead I do an exponential steps, that is 1 step, 2 steps, 4 steps, 8 steps, I keep on doubling each time. By the time I've done 30 steps, I've gone 1 billion meters and I've gone around the Earth 26 times. And so exponential change always looks like this. It's very slow at the beginning. It seems like I'm taking 1 step, 2 steps, but not very much. And then the last step is 500 million meters. And so change is always like this. We don't see what's happening under the covers, and then bam, suddenly something's in the headlines that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction. And this is increasing. This pace is increasing. So one of the organizations that I work with is called Singularity University, and we focus on a range of what we call exponential technologies. Technologies that are changing our lives, changing our worlds. Everything from computers and next generation computer networks to devices that can talk to each other, which we've call IoT. The next generation agriculture, next generation medicine. We've got 1,000 brainiacs from all around the world who are experts on each of these different topics. And my focus is on taking the understanding what they learn in what I think of as their sort of vertical arenas and applying it to the future of work, the future of learning, and the future of organization. So let's stay rooted in the future of learning. So you take a variety of these different technologies. It isn't just that they're accelerating, they're moving fast on each on their own. It's that they actually work together. And so you take a half a dozen of these, next generation networks, robotics, and so on, you merge them together, and you get something out of science fiction that's a self-driving car and a self-driving truck. 10 years ago, we had smart people in Silicon Valley. That's where we keep the future. We had smart people in Silicon Valley who were saying this was not possible. But by leveraging each of these different technologies, they were able to create something out of science fiction. Well, speaking out of science fiction, this is actually a product going on the market in January. It's a Bay Area startup. It's a personal drone. This is the flying car we've all been promised. This is a startup that was actually announced at our exponential medicine conference last month. The bone, we've got so many problems with tissue and bone rejection. What if you grow bones from your own cells? They're actually doing that today. This is a startup in Japan. They're building vertical farms in high-rises in Tokyo. Right now the projection said they can produce 11 million heads of lettuce in a year in one building. This is the Colorado School of Mines that just announced that they have a graduate program helping students to figure out how we're going to go mine asteroids. This coming generation is going to solve problems that have plagued human beings for millennia. They're going to cure cancer. They're going to figure out how to colonize another planet. What are the skills? What do they need to learn to be able to do that? So, and then if you want the most mind-blowing, a friend of mine, Mary Lou Jepson, has a startup called Open Water. She's got a device that she actually just exhibited last week at a conference, about the size of a video cassette. Have any of you seen a video cassette? What's the age level in that? That can basically scan your body in your own home using infrared light, totally non-invasive, and generate a three-dimensional image of your body 1 billion times better than an X-ray. That's not the crazy part. She thinks she can hook it up to a skull cap, and she can read the human mind. How can she do that? By watching the synapses of the brain, training artificial intelligence software as you watch a movie or read a book. And then it sees the patterns and is able to actually generate images and words from what you are imagining. Now there's anything straight out of science fiction is this now. But Mary Lou doesn't want to release this immediately because she wants us all to talk about this. We got all these technologies that are constantly changing our world. I always say, Steve Jobs didn't stand on the stage 10 years ago, only 10 years ago, when he announced the iPhone, and say, I'm going to ruin human conversation. I'm going to destroy the ability of families to talk to each other. I'm going to stare at these digital distraction machines. I'm going to make it so that kids go to sleep at night with tons of friends and wake up in the morning alone because they all talk on social media. I'm going to make it so that you are never away from the world's information. As a matter of fact, you're a junkie for news. So that you know how many times we actually check these? An average of 82 times a day. You know how many times we actually touch them? Over 400 times a day. We pull these things out and just touch it to be having access to the world's information. And so we need to talk about these technologies and their impact, but basically, think of each of these technologies I just talked about. What do we need to help people to learn to be able to deal with this rapidly accelerating pace of change? How will devices like this change entire industries like psychology? How will they change the way we learn when you can actually know whether or not a student is learning? How will it change relationships between people? You say, honey, does this thing make me look fat? And then, no, put on the skull cap. I want to know. Do you really okay, that's not good. But think of all the ways our lives will continue to be transformed. And it's not that the pace of change is slowing down. These technologies are actually accelerating. So I won't talk a lot about the world of work, but the idea that work is basically solving problems. That's really what we solve problems, performing tasks and using our skills. I'll talk a little bit about skills. We have to create a new world of problem solvers. So let me give you a couple of examples. One of the projects that my wife and I worked with Google is something called Google Science Fair. And this is Ann Hakuzinski, age of 15, visited her cousins in the Philippines, were doing really poorly in school because they couldn't afford electricity. She goes back home, 15, researches online, decides she can build a batteryless flashlight by taking two, they're called Peltier tiles, and the warmth of a human hand creates a temperature differential that generates an electric current and can power an LED. And materials scientists have looked at this and said, we missed this. If you'd asked a graduate student, would this have worked? They would have said no. So just in the interest of time, I want to make sure, I'll just blow through. This is Bonke and Sekiwi. Teenagers, their father in Mozambique was a subsistence farmer who played out his land, no more nutrients in the land. They read on cell phones about distilling chicken poop, literally, as a fertilizer, putting in hydroponic farms and increased the crop yield by almost 50%. This is Srishti. She was riding through the fields of India and seeing a massive drought and thought, well, couldn't she figure out a way to retain more water in the soil? And by using a combination of avocado peels and orange peels, she created an additive to soil that could increase the saturation rate by 30%. So these are the problem solvers of tomorrow. These are the kids that are solving problems that we can't even envision. And if we only have this model, the 3 boxes model of just a chunk of education at the beginning of our lives and then this chunk of work and leisure at the end, then we are not going to be able to help create the problems of the solvers of tomorrow. As a matter of fact, this is really the way the world is shifting. So, and young people, you're starting to see this. Young people are doing this. Sure, they went to school at the beginning and they might start their first job, but then they take a gap year and then they're working, they've got a day job, and then they're also driving for Uber at night, and they're actually going off on a safari with their friends, and then, and they're starting to sell products on Etsy. It's this constant process. And oh, by the way, the yellow part, the learning part, never ever stops. So I call this a portfolio of work. The basic premise, just like you have a diversified portfolio of investment, you've got a day job, but then you're also driving for Uber at night, and you're also working on your startup with your friend. And this is a rational response to a constantly changing world. As the contract between workers and hirers erodes, we no longer have that longevity in many industries of being in one field for a long period of time. And so this is actually the kind of adaptive learning that we need to do, to continually having a portfolio of work and ultimately a portfolio of learning is a really, really rational response to a constantly changing world. And this is more what it's going to look like for the young people that are coming up now. Oh, and by the way, this old model, where we over-indexed on information, where we had kids go to school because we want to get so much data into their heads, when we've got access to the world's data, it turns out it's those transferable skills that are going to be more useful to them. And so there are hundreds of them. I've mentioned persuading, innovating, predicting, sewing, responding, analyzing. These are all gerunds that are usable in a variety of different situations. And these are the skills, it's these transferable skills that we need to change the calculus on, because continually people have more and more access to information just in time, more and more access to information baked into what they're doing. When you are using Excel and you need to learn how to use a pivot table, you don't suddenly put down your keyboard and go get a book on pivot tables. You hit F1 and it walks you through using pivot tables. This is increasingly how technology is going to work. Just-in-time information embedded into what you're doing so that you can learn. And obviously you've gotten the memo. We need to start to shift the calculus. We need to help people to actually develop these transferable skills and these traits that allow them to be able to do work in a variety of different arenas. And so let me jump ahead and give you a couple of ways to think about this, and then I'd love to make this a discussion. So I talk about superpowers. Talk about superpowers, basically skills that each of us have, that a unique mix of skills that everybody in this room has that nobody else has exactly the same mix of. Now the problem is, nobody gave you the user manual of you. When you were born, nobody said, here's the skills that you have that you are more optimized for. Nobody said, here's the things you're going to be better at than anybody else. We are all trial and error machines. We don't call it trial and success. We call it trial and error because we have to test things out. We're constantly trying to solve new problems. And it turns out that there are superpowers. So this axis is, And this access is what we love doing. If you're not very good at it and you don't love it, well, we all do things for expediency's sake. My first job when I barely escaped high school was making 2 piles of paper out of one and sending a fax. Has anybody seen a fax? We also have things that we're good at, but we don't really love doing. Again, for expediency's sake, we have to do things that, every job, all work is not perfect. But increasingly, if we're going to continually solve the problems of tomorrow, we need to figure out how we move along this axis. And so it starts off from, you're not interested in that topic at all. Oh, maybe you're starting to read an article or two. Oh, maybe you're reading a lot more and you're talking to people about it. Now you might want to take a course in it. Oh, maybe I want to study it. Maybe I realize this might be my vocation. Maybe this might be my passion. Maybe it might be my mission. Maybe it might be my purpose in life. So this is the axis that we need to help people move along, because what we find is if you're really good at it and you don't love it, you're not going to move this way. Increasingly, we need to give learners of all ages access to the process of falling in love with subjects, with problems to solve. And then, because we're all trial and error machines, we will continually move up to that upper quadrant. Those are our superpowers. What are some of the superpowers I suggest we develop? There are 4 of them. They're all transferable skills. And I call it PACE because I talk a lot about the pace of change. First off, we have to be problem solvers. That's why we pay people in work. That's why people pay us in work, is to solve problems. Now, in every organization, there's 1 or 2 people that create problems, and you probably know who they are. But for the most part, we're problem solvers. And so if we think of ourselves as problem solvers, everything we do in work changes. Everything we do in our lives changes in terms of the kinds of problems that we are optimized to solve. But we also need to be adaptive, because that pace of change I talked about, that is not going to slow down. I could give you a dozen different examples of technologies that are being developed by people I know that are going to have as profound an effect on industries as Google, as profound an effect on technology as the digital distraction device. We need to be adaptive. We need to be creative. This is what keeps us ahead of robots and software. Problem solvers who are adaptive and creative. And then finally, we need to be entrepreneurial in our thinking. That doesn't mean everybody's got to start a company, but it means that an entrepreneur falls in love with a problem and has to solve it. So problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and entrepreneurial in their thinking. These are the transferable skills I focus on again and again, of learners of all ages. Now, what does this do to school? What does this do to college? So what ends up happening at that inflection point, that shift from the education box to the work box, we graduate from high school, secondary school, and then we've got, in the past, only a couple of options. Increasingly, there are going to be more and more and more options, and we'll have all those options for the rest of our lives. So that model that I talked about much more of a portfolio of work and a portfolio of learning, we're going to have to, we need a bigger boat. We need to figure out ways to be able to help everybody, but especially youth at that 18, 19-year-old inflection point, to be able to figure out how do they make these choices. We need to give them more and more tools to be able to navigate this world of constant change. Oh, and by the way, the business model of those schools is going to change as well. We'll definitely talk about this in Q&A. So if this is the bundle of a college, if these are the different components of a college, what we found is that the internet unbundles various industries, and education is the next one. It is the next one to actually be pulled apart. So each of these different functions actually, as you throw the internet at it, you throw the combination of automation and globalization, turns the whole thing on its side. And so it turns out that the creation of content, the delivery of content, that we're seeing all of that unbundling. And there's no Uber of education yet. It actually is unbundling because the world is changing so fast and the model absolutely has to change. It has to shift to a lifelong learning model. And oh, by the way, as an industry, if you think of it as large colleges at the bottom, at the top, small colleges at the bottom, everything in between, the internet always evaporates the middle. This is happening in the United States. I wrote a paper 6 years ago called Unbundling Higher Education, where I predicted that the model was starting to unravel. Last year in the United States, we had 2,200 place-based colleges. You know how many ran at a deficit? 25%. 25% of the colleges in the United States made less money than they spent last year. Now, if you are Stanford, Harvard at the top. You've got multi-billion-dollar endowments. You can stop charging tuition tomorrow. You'll be just fine. If you're a local community college and you are focused on the needs of your community, you will be just fine. It's in the middle that we see over and over again different businesses have challenges, and colleges will be no different. In the United States alone, we've got 90 different edtech startups. This is now 120 that are focusing on different aspects of trying to impact, trying to unravel, unbundle education. Now, this is actually a network of colleges based in Australia that offer over 163 different degrees and have 1/3 students on their collective platforms. And so we need to think about, we need to think differently about the ways that we are approaching how we learn. And so this is actually something IBM offered a number of years back. Remember I talked about special knowledges and transferable skills? So they say it's T-skills. You want to be deep on something, but you want to continually have a generalist view, trying to continually be curious about a wide variety of different things, and ultimately you build a portfolio of learning, a portfolio of knowledge, in the way that you are continually interacting with the world. And this, by the way, prepares you for that constantly changing model of work, that portfolio of work. Now, I haven't talked much about technology at all, except at the beginning talking about Archimedes. So just briefly, and then Q&A. Technology can replace human capabilities. It can perform human tasks. We do a lot of that right now. But technology can also augment us. Technology can also help us to understand our own superpowers. It can help us to develop our own superpowers. It can be much more, I don't call it a partner, it can be an enabler. And so I'm not going to delve too much into technology because I'm running a little bit over time, but the basic premise is, if you want a model of this, it's called Stitch Fix. So this is a company in the US. What they do is they pair an artificial intelligence and AI software with a designer, a clothing designer, and you ever get a monthly subscription for clothes that are so wickedly what you wanted, you can't believe that it's possible. And it's because there's a human designer that's partnering with the software. Together they're figuring out exactly what it is, that set of clothing designs for the market of one. And so this is the kind of model that we'll see increasingly in education. We will see more and more technologies that are about helping us to identify our superpowers, develop our superpowers, and supplement our superpowers. I won't delve too much into the technology of it. But just to wrap up, then, so if we think of this shift to a digital work economy, we think of this shift from a learning standpoint, what are the messages? Well, we have to be adaptive. We have to be able to help people to not just see that there are these learning situations, there are these work situations, there are these learning these leisure situations, but actually, over time, that those lines blur. And young people are saying this nowadays. So they go to work on a project with their friends, but they're having a ton of fun and they're learning, but they're also relaxing. So you want the lines to blur, and you want to be able to help people to understand and develop their own superpowers, work collaboratively with others, and for those lines to continue to blur to the point where they're able to build their portfolio of work, learning, and leisure all simultaneously. And if there's any takeaway, I would suggest is to remember that this is what it's all about. It's helping each of us to be able to identify and develop our superpowers. Each of you has a unique mix. Every student, every learner that you ever meet has a unique mix that they must be able to identify and develop if we're to have a positive future of learning. Thanks. Okay, did I do the arc okay? Okay.
Yes, it was an absolute journey. I'm most grateful. I had to come down and get my traditional pen and paper. I was writing notes, and I see a few other people in the room as well. So
I always post these on SlideShare by the end of the day. So all these slides, and I've got a bunch at the end of this as well for things we didn't cover. So I'll make sure that they're all online.
Thank you. I'm going to check out that Stitch Fix amongst a few other things. Also, I loved how you alluded to the business model was going to change. So, who would like to start us off with a question and answer? We'll have the Q&A now to continue the discussion. Gary's also given us a couple of topics that he obviously would like or can expand on and how we relate the education into the business world, the world of work,
Yeah.
and things like that. And after that, we'll have a morning tea so we can continue the conversation. So can we start over?
Please.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for
So
your
what's your name?
Brad.
Brad.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. It's very thought-provoking. I have a question that's around the future of teachers, and I work with a learning management system that actually comes out of the States called Schoology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we have a bit of a shortage of teachers in New Zealand.
Ah.
And you would have heard the coined probably phrased guide on the side instead of didactic up the front, which is shifting. And then there's another sort of saying which I quite like, which is the guide on the ride, which is even closer. And my query, I guess, is what your view is on teachers not necessarily being single subject experts anymore, them being someone who's personable and can get on the ride with any of the kids and facilitate what may already be a preordained context that's been held in a learning management system. Anyone can come in and follow the path with the students, and do you see that probably could be the direction that we're going in the future?
So we did not talk before, but it actually, literally, the next slide is, so the guide on the side, the phrase comes from Esther Wojcicki, the author of Moonshots in Education. If there's one book I can suggest that you read about exactly this transition, it's Esther's book. So she's a great friend. She's runs the journalism program at Palo Alto High School. School of 3,000 students. All the students go through her program. It's not because they want to become journalists, they want to learn how to think. And so, just give you one example, what she does is the students walk in, or in every other classroom at Palo Alto High, they walk in with their phones, the teacher says, put them away. They walk into her classroom, says, pull them out. Interview the person next to you, write it down, record a video. Now you're going to use that in the next edition of the magazines that we're going to create. And the students do everything, absolutely everything. And so, the model is, the challenge for a teacher is that if you were trained in the older model, you were told that success meant control, essentially. Is that you got a cohort of kids to a certain point, and they got through a set of tests, and they got on, thank God, they got to the next level. Okay, great. Oh, I got a couple that fell behind, I screwed up. That, we have to change the way of thinking. So as always, I talk about mindset and skill set. So most teachers have the skill set to be able to be that guide on the side. They don't have the mindset. We haven't helped them to be able to develop that mindset. And so that's where I think the greatest challenge, the greatest opportunities are, is we need to change teacher training. We need to have different incentives. We need to actually help them to be as transparent as possible that they don't know everything about their subject, because we told them in the past, no, you're the expert, and now we have to tell them, no, you're the guide. And what you're trying to do is you are helping them on the learning ride, on the learning journey, because it's a lifelong journey. The mentality that I'm just going to get you to the end of this year, that's all my job is that's just false. And so the difficulty is that if you're not that deep on a subject, what you want to make sure is that you are not giving false information. So I went to a Lutheran junior high school where I was taught creationism, which I didn't do well in. But what we need to do is we need to help make sure that the teachers have access to the information, the transparency to be able to admit that they don't know everything, but that they're there to enable the students, they're helping the students to go find the answer themselves. Other questions, thoughts, disagreements? You don't have to agree with any of this.
I teach in the ELT here, and we've been constantly told that the polytechnic system is really in difficulties with deficits and so on, and yet you've got the community college area as being actually still the survivors amongst the system. I just see a bit of a contradiction.
I'm not saying it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's hard. What's happening is in the same way that we have to tell teachers to be able to shift their thinking, administrators have to shift their thinking as well. And so if the business model is predicated upon a 2 or 4 year school, and it's a cohort that typically is the 18 to 22-year-old, it's just that model of a specific kind of teaching for a specific kind of ultimate work, that's challenged, because if the world is going to constantly change and we're going to try to teach these students to be much more adaptive, then the school model has to be changed as well. And so I'm going to just give you an example. There's an entrepreneur in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is a town of 30,000 people. Used to be a logging town, and now is basically just a retirement community. But it was dying on the vine. All the kids were moving away. And so this entrepreneur came back after successfully launching a number of Silicon Valley companies. And he said, within 3 years, we're going to turn this town into a hub of artificial intelligence and robotics programming. And he did that by talking to townspeople and working with people and said, okay, yes, that would be really, we should do that. And he worked with a local community college to transform the business model, transform what they were teaching. So it is not easy. But what it takes is a much more adaptive mindset that you're a platform. That is, that learners are going to come, you're going to teach them much more of these adaptive and transferable skills, but that they're going to gather information in much smaller chunks, so that business model that has to be 2 years, it has to be 4 years, has to change as well. Does that mean then that the way you make money, the way that you manage your resources, all of that needs to change as well. So I'm not saying it's easy, nor that every single community college will survive. I know that in the middle, off the grid, liberal arts colleges are the ones most at risk. Those 25% of the United States, about half of those are liberal arts colleges that are off the grid. And will there be different funding models for learning, especially as you become a platform for lifelong learning? Yes, but it expands your customer base. So I'm happy to talk more. I mean, especially if you've got administrators that going through this, I'm happy to talk more. And like I said, I've written extensively about this. The piece that I wrote on bundling higher education actually talks about a bunch of the strategies for that transition.
Thank you.
Other questions, thoughts?
So my question was about, we live in the information age, and at the moment there's just an overload of information.
Yeah.
Do you think there is implications on people's ability to go and retain information, or be able to identify what's relevant and irrelevant for them? And do you think that has negative or positive implications on learning?
So yes. So the question was, flood of information overload, are there negative implications, are there positive things we can be doing? If you want one of the greatest theorists on this, there's a man by the name of Clay Shirky, S-H-I-R-K-Y at NYU. And not only is Clay brilliant, but he's obviously a good-looking guy because he has my hairline. And what he said a dozen years ago is, it's not that we have too much information, we have filter failure. We have filter failure. How did we filter in the past? Oh, it came on paper, and it was stuck in books, and we had to go get it. And now it comes at us. It comes at us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It comes at us in a range of different forms. We're information junkies, where we're just continually taking it in, and we sift it very, very poorly. We are not designed to take in this much information and synthesize it well. And the polarization in my country is a perfect example of just one artifact of that. And so there's a couple of strategies that I point to. The first is that we must train everyone, not just our youth, but especially our youth, to be intelligent consumers of media. We didn't let our son, who's actually with me on this trip, he's now 22, just graduated from college, we didn't let him watch broadcast TV until he was almost 10 years old. Because we didn't want him to see a commercial without being able to say, what are they trying to sell you? Why? So think of everything when kids are looking at Facebook feeds or WhatsApp, any of those sorts of things, and they're getting all these marketing messages at them. Those brains aren't formed well enough to actually really, really understand a lot of those implications. And so the first is that we have to teach people to be intelligent consumers of media and to question, to develop the kind of thinking processes that allow them to be able to filter it themselves intelligently. The second thing is we need to be intentional. That is, we didn't have to choose a lot in the past when there was no television, radio, or digital media coming at us. We didn't have to choose. We chose to go get it. We didn't have to choose what we were going to consume. And so I encourage teachers in schools to say, to have no phone day, like no technology days, at all. And just how do you get through the world without it? I encourage families to have times where they literally just put everything down from a technological standpoint and just don't gather any more of that information for a period of time. We have to be more intentional. We have to make more choices about it. And then the third is then, and this is where Silicon Valley is, where we fail here, is we need to give you more technologies that allow you to filter it. And so I would look for, there actually are some really, really great websites and apps that are all about trying to filter information and give you a range of not just the negative but the positive. So this is, we need to leverage those tools better. And if we don't, we know the negative consequences. We're dealing with them in my country